as a beginner to get into pressurized fermentation? What do you need if perhaps you want to do kegging? The whole idea here is to save you guys time, money, make sure you get the right information, you buy the right equipment. The video is intended primarily for somebody who's starting out. You don't have that knowledge and you want to get a good idea of what you need to get into that process. So you might have been used to just using these sorts of tins or perhaps a brew in a bag. You've gone into a traditional fermenter, cold crashed, and then used a bottling wand into the bottle, capped it, and that's how you've enjoyed your beer. So the next evolution basically is to get rid of oxidization, which is a big killer for beer. What that means is you're exposing the beer to oxygen, you're shortening the lifespan of the beer, and you're altering the flavor over a period of time. So to get away from that, you would need to put your beer in a situation where it's never exposed to oxygen. One of the ways basically is to make sure that you transfer from one vessel to the next vessel without exposure to oxygen. The other thing you can do obviously is pressurized fermentation, where you put your yeast under pressure and you naturally carbonate your beer. So at the end of that cycle, not only is your beer finished, but it's now also naturally carbonated. So that's a fast way. So I mean, literally you can do that as low as 4 days. So some nice aspects to that. You're obviously increasing and changing the way that the yeast reacts and converts those sugars into alcohols and produces CO2. But now in that process, you obviously need to control the CO2 level in the unit. And towards the end of that process, you want to increase it to make sure you get a good carbonated beer. So there's a number of things you need. So when you purchase, for argument's sake, one of these units, it would come with just a standard airlock on it, and the other side wouldn't have a carbonation cap. It would just be closed off. So in order to be able to do this process, you need a couple of things. One of them you're going to need is what they call a carbonation cap. Now, this is just a valve in essence. In its normal state, it's closed, and when you put what they call a disconnect, now this disconnect is spring-loaded, and when you click it onto the valve like that, it opens it up, and now you can let beer come out, or liquid, or gas. And then to release it, obviously just pull it up and click it out. So you've got to have two of them on here, one for your liquid and one for your gas. Now generally speaking, you always use yellow for liquid, red for gas. On the liquid line, you would need some way for that carbonation cap to connect to the liquid and be able to draw it out. Now to do that, you use what they call a floating dip tube. Now this dip tube normally comes with just a stainless steel ball, and we sell these little filters as an option. Now it's obviously advisable to have that filter. If there is anything floating around in your liquid, you're not drawing it up. This just connects onto the underside of the carbonation cap. As you can see here, there's one over that side, and you would sort of trim that down to a level where it's sort of at the bottom here, and it's always floating on top of the liquid. Right, so once you've got that carbonation cap and the ball connected, you now need a way of controlling the pressure, and you do that with what's called a spunding valve. Now these spunding valves come in different types. Some are spring-loaded. These are our diaphragm type spunding valves. They're obviously extremely reliable, and a couple important things to remember about a spunding valve. It's controlling the pressure, but you need to tell it how much pressure to control. And to do that, you use a process called calibration, and I'll run through that in a second. The other thing is these are directional. Now they have an arrow on it. Make sure the arrow is facing outwards. So in other words, the gas is coming in and going out in the direction of the arrow. The other third important thing is do not connect your spunding valve onto the liquid post. You will regret it. The next morning when you wake up, your beer will be everywhere except where you want it. So always on the gas outpost. So now how do you calibrate these valves? You're going to need a vessel with a known pressure in it, and you could use a regulator, something like this, set it up to a pressure, connect it to the valve, and calibrate the valve that way. So how do you do this? So for this demonstration, I've just got a standard spunding valve, and there's no actual gauge connected on it. But you don't have to have a gauge on these valves to calibrate them. You can actually just use what I've done here, a Duotight connection. Now Duotights are these connectors from KegLand. They're a double seal system, so they're very secure, and you just push your hose in, it's done. Simple. So I've connected the spunding valve up with a carbonation cap. Now these, as you can see, these carbonation caps have got multiple purposes. Not only am I calibrating a valve with it, but you can use it to clean out your beer lines, all sorts of other things. So you would connect this onto your CO2 cylinder, like that. And once this is connected up, you would set your CO2 cylinder up to a known pressure. By doing that, obviously you just turn this valve in. Now I'm sitting at, call it 20 psi. The valve is totally in. To calibrate the valve, you start turning it out until you hear some gas escaping. And then turn it back in till the gas stops. Now it's calibrated to that 20 psi. If I start turning the pressure up, it immediately lets that pressure out. So that's how you calibrate these. Now you can calibrate it to whatever pressure you're looking for. Generally speaking, on a carbonated beer, it's somewhere between 10 and 12 psi. If you go onto the forums, you'll see there's loads of different ways. You generally wouldn't start with a high pressure. When you begin your fermentation, you would build it up gradually, and towards the end of the fermentation, you would then increase the pressure dramatically to get that carbonation into your beer. So once you've calibrated your valve, you can now put it onto your unit and go to bed with confidence. It's going to just get rid of the excess CO2 and the process can happen. Now, I'll tell you, in terms of these regulators, obviously there's a mountain of different regulators out there. I would strongly advise to just from the beginning purchase yourself a decent regulator like this. Yes, it is more cumbersome than the larger units, especially if you're going to parties and all these sorts of things. You can obviously buy an additional smaller valve for that. But this is nice for demonstration purposes. I've just put it onto a soda stream bottle, but this will go onto the bigger bottles. And trust me, later on you will want bigger bottles of gas. This just really isn't sufficient. These have two valves on them, or two gauges. And what the gauges are telling you is, it's telling you how much CO2 is left in your bottle and how much pressure you're dispensing. So on the valves themselves, you can see there, if I start to turn this up, you can see this valve going up, and that's telling you how much pressure. And this one is telling me how much is left in here, about 10 or 12 psi left in this bottle. So simple to use, in and out, a simple device. The other important thing is always put a check valve on your regulator. Now these check valves you can buy from us, and essentially what that does is it stops liquid coming back into your regulator. You will damage your regulator if you put liquid into it. So save yourself the aggravation, just buy a check valve. This sort of EVA beer line you can get from us, and you buy this per meter. It's simple and easy to use if you're connecting any of these sorts of fittings on. Now if you buy these disconnects, you can buy them with a barb fitting. Essentially you would just put your tube on and put a clamp on it. Simple, straightforward. Alternatively, you can buy with an MFL. So that's a threaded fitting. And you would screw a Duotight onto that. And remember with these, when it gets tight, you just give it a little extra click and it's done. Then your tubing just connects straight in. Again, simple. To release it, you just pull down and it clips out. So these are easy to use. There's no real rocket science to these. So now you've got your valve calibrated. You've got a regulator. The next step is obviously to let the fermentation happen. And according to your recipe, you would then increase the amount of CO2 towards the end of the fermentation and allow it to naturally carbonate. Now this is carbonated, what then? Well, let's just assume during this process you want to take a hydrometer reading. So how do you do that? Well, then remember, actually I didn't mention this to you, these disconnects come in grey. which is for gas, and black, which is for liquid. So you would need to get yourself some way of dispensing liquid here while it's under pressure, and you would do that with one of these. This is a simple little system. It's called a Broncho Party Tap, and really all you do is you click down on it and it'll dispense some liquid, and it's actually great for parties or like this sort of application. So you would connect your liquid disconnect onto the unit and get yourself a glass, and oopsie, just turn it that way, and you could dispense some to do a hydrometer reading. And obviously then at the end of the fermentation, once it's cooled down, you can enjoy a pint and enjoy some of the fruit of your labors. So that's a nice thing. Now these you can buy in various sort of formats. We do have what they call a Pluto gun and nuka taps and things coming on our next shipment that are just a fancier way of dispensing. Now another thing to remember with these sort of units, there's definitely measurements that you use on the type of beer line. So for instance, on our Pluto guns, 1.5 meter 4 mil is what's recommended. If you start going longer or shorter, you're either going to have too little pressure or you'll have too much and you'll just get lots of foam coming out of your beer. So you can do a little homework on that just to give you an idea. There is a little bit of science involved in this. We do sell these sort of kits complete, so when you dispense, it's already done for you, and later on you can start experimenting with that. Now we also have a range of other valves. Now let's assume you've gone and you've bought yourself a big gas bottle, you've got this big regulator on, and now you want to be able to dispense CO2 to 2 or 3 outlets. So you can in fact join these valves up like this. You can have your inlet gas on this side, and again you can calibrate these valves exactly like I showed you with the spunding valve, or you can take a T-piece, connect the T-piece in here, put a separate gauge in, and you can calibrate each valve on the fly. And then from there you can dispense it to a couple of different kegs, or you can use it for cleaning out your beer lines. Now interestingly enough, if you want to clean out a beer line, let's say for argument's sake I want to clean out where's it? This little Broncho tap that I've just used here now. A simple way to do that would be to just take, where's it gone, this carbonation cap over here. Yeah, actually no, I don't have the right things here, but in essence you would connect this up. No, in fact we could do that. Okay, I'm just going to use a T-piece here for okay, so there's, I've just made up something quickly here. You would connect this onto the little Broncho tap and turn up your CO2 cylinder, and you could simply clean out your beer lines. So that just gives you an idea. With a few little simple components you can make a multitude of different things. So these things are not just for one specific purpose. Like I said, you can do a variety of things with them. So now that you've done your fermentation and it's ready to drink, what now? Now let's assume you don't have a keg. You could then simply just cool this down, get it to a temperature. Obviously your yeast still is in there, but sometimes that's not a bad thing. It conditions your beer as well, and then you could just dispense straight from here. Alternatively, if you have a keg, you could then connect a second line from your liquid out, and you would remove your spunding valve. Then you would connect your CO2 regulator onto the gas post. Remember, gas post. Okay, let's just turn that off. And then you would connect up, okay, I don't have another pipe here, but I'm basically just going to connect this disconnect on. Remember, black for liquid. And now assuming this is going into another disconnect on your keg, and then on the keg side, once you've obviously cleaned that out and sorted it, you would then be able to transfer it in. But now remember, you're dealing with pressures. So now you would have to be able to release pressure on the keg. So how do you do that? Now all these devices have what they call a PRV. That's this little valve here. Each time you release pressure, you allow the transfer of liquid into that keg. You could then attach one of these flow stoppers with another spunding valve, and you could simply just stand back and that process would happen. But again, just as a beginner's guide, you would need to control that process. You don't want a huge amount of pressure that you just get foam coming into your keg. You need to control that slowly so that that keg can fill up with minimal foam. And then obviously you need some way of knowing how much is inside that keg. Some people will weigh the keg as it's being filled. Other people, like I said, they'll use this device over here. But I'll do a separate video on that at a later stage. For the beginning now, all I want to emphasize to you is make sure when you're buying all this sort of equipment that you're not wasting your money on items you don't need. All you really need for pressurized fermentation and for a keg is a couple of lengths of beer line, a couple of disconnects, a couple of these carbonation caps, a dip tube with a filter, a CO2 bottle, a regulator, and and a spunding valve, and you're pretty much done. So guys, I hope this was informative. I hope I gave you some good idea of what you need. I will do another video next time. As soon as our new shipment comes in, we're bringing in a bunch of new conical fermenters, kegs, Nuka taps, all sorts of other devices. Then I will do a video on that to give you a good idea, taking it from here into the keg and dispensing from the keg. Thank you for your support, and goodbye for now.